I seriously started taking pictures about 1970 when I came back from Chicago to Cleveland and got access to a darkroom at Case Western Reserve and started making pictures for the Case Western Reserve newspaper, The Observer. The very first pictures that I sold were on Hessler Street in 1970 in the summer when they had the first Hessler Street Festival. And I was selling my prints for $7 a piece. And I was delighted that somebody would actually give me money for something I enjoyed this much. And at that point, I lived in a house with 4 other people on 115th Street. My rent, my part of the rent, was $32 a month. And by working at a deli at $4 an hour for 8 hours a week, I would earn my monthly rent. And with the other money, I could go out and buy chemicals and film and paper and continue to do photography. I met a photographer named Minor White who was doing a 3-day workshop here in Cleveland in the fall of 1970. And after showing him my very early attempts at making pictures, which he mostly said were worthless, he invited me to come and live at his house. And a week later, I hitchhiked to Boston and spent more than 2.5 years off and on living and working and studying with somebody who was a great master in the field. I was very lucky. And simultaneously, I got the bug. I got seriously hooked because one of my first jobs at Minor's house was to organize his library and to learn for the first time that this medium had a history. It was also amazing to be in the home of someone who, when I came up from the darkroom in the morning and had wet prints, he could look at them and tell me everything that was wrong with them. I kept getting my hands slapped over and over and over again, and hopefully learned a little something. In '83, I had a show of my photographs of Minor, which eventually became a book called Lives I've Never Lived, and moved to New York actually in '84. And within about 4 or 5 months, I met an art director from a magazine in Frankfurt who started sending me all over the world to photograph remarkable people. This photo, for example, of Dennis Hopper was shot for the Allgemeine. This was a Porsche that was in a junkyard right next to Dennis's house in Venice, California. When we arrived at his house, he opens the door, and here was the epitome of cool. Dennis sort of mumbled, "What do you want to do? How are you?" And here he was wearing a gray suit with a gray shirt and a gray tie, looking like a super hip banker. And when I explained what I wanted to do, I managed to say to Dennis, that suit has got to go, because that is not the Dennis Hopper that everybody knows. That is not the mythical Dennis Hopper that I need to make pictures of. So within minutes, he goes upstairs, he comes back, he gets his leathers on, he gets his shades on, and he's the Dennis Hopper that's in this photograph. In June of 1984, a few months before I moved to New York, I was asked to come down to Akron. That was having the first American retrospective of Cindy Sherman's work and photograph her. We had a wonderful session. I had studied a catalog from a European exhibition of her work. And the one thing I sort of sensed about her is that she was a very shy person. And given my sort of innate understanding of her shyness, I brought 2 little masks with me to the shooting, a black one and a white one. And she just responded, saw that I understood something, and on the catalog that she signed for me, she thanked me for bringing the mask and letting her hide. In April of 1987, I was asked by Vanity Fair to do a story about Cindy Sherman in her studio, because later that summer, her retrospective that had started at the Akron Art Museum was going to open at the Whitney. And because I already knew her, we worked very easily together. We spent a whole day shooting where she was just most cooperative. So this particular contact sheet is Cindy in her Walker Street studio in 1987. It's in April. And as you can see, she couldn't be more comfortable. If you go from frame to frame, she is so completely there. The picture of Chuck Close was done in a studio of a friend named Jerry Spagnoli, who did the daguerreotypes and was the person who was shooting the daguerreotypes for Chuck over a number of years. And Jerry arranged for Chuck to be able to be photographed by me. So whenever I would do these stories or have a shoot, for the magazine, I would have to shoot in color. And I would do that in transparency color film. But I always was also shooting black and white for myself, knowing that at some point I would exhibit both the black and white and or the color pictures, because sometimes one thing worked better, sometimes something else worked better. So that's sort of a little bit of the background of these two photographs. So in 1999, a German publisher called Umschau Braus brought out a book called Aerosentence. And it's got, maybe 130 of my nude photographs, all in black and white. But it's a subject matter that has kept drawing my eyes recurrently from the very beginning in 1970. And the most recent work, which dates from just the last few years, and the fact that I'm now able to use Photoshop and digital captures as opposed to film, has given me a great deal of latitude as to how I interpret images. And they're sort of loosely an homage to the early 20th century fauve artist, especially Matisse, who was so loose in his use of color when he did his portraits of his wife and of various models in his studio. And I'm trying in my own way to acknowledge this important contribution to 20th century art by doing these portraits and these nudes in that way.